What's up guys, back with another YouTube video finally. Now I've got my setup completely finished. Now I'm going to walk you through how I created this tour poster design for The Weeknd. Now this is for his upcoming Europe and Latin America tour next year. So let's jump straight into first. Now just here we've got my final tour poster design that I've created. So you can see I've got the full tour title, After HoursTil Dawn, artist name, global stadium tour, and then locations and dates. When you're creating tour posters, there is a lot of typographic content. So you want to have that as kind of the main focus so everyone knows what they're looking at. And then this kind of image decoration for me is there as a support. So my kind of original touch that I've tried to put on this is I've added this kind of horizontal scanline effect against this kind of harsh contrast background whilst having some vibrant colors in there as well. So instead of going into a new canvas, I'm going to walk you through this document because there is quite a lot to it. So in order to make sure that you're not here for hours, let's go from the start. So my first step in creating these tour poster designs is going to be to shape a grid to work around. You can see that this is the grid setup I've been using. Now, this isn't any specific calculations or anything. I just wanted a lot of rows to give me some leeway for when it comes to organizing type. So if you come up to View, Guides, and New Guide Layout, this is the setup I'm using. So 6 columns, 16 rows, 50 pixel gutter, and 100 pixel margin just to give enough space around the edges. Now I'm going to hit OK here and use this as my setup. So as I mentioned, when it comes to tour posters, there's a lot of information you need to make sure that can be read. The first things I'm going to focus on are the tour name and the artist name. Coming into the main titles folder I've got here, the first one is going to be After HoursTil Dawn, which is the tour name, and then the artist name just here. Now, when it comes to formatting this, if I hide these now, I'm going to type in After Hours. Now, the typeface I'm using is Chabot Condensed, which I will link in the description below. And I wanted to make sure that they kind of align with the height of the rows. So I'm going to add After Hours just up here. I'm going to make sure that it's center justified and center aligned, and then increase this until it reaches or near reaches the margins on the sides. So you can see here, this perfectly fits within 3 rows. So now from this point, I'm going to use my transform tools, hold Option and Shift, and extend this to fit against the margin lines. Now, because this is a strict grid system, we are able to do this without losing any readability, and it's completely fine to do in this case. And then adding in the words Till Dawn, I'm going to duplicate this layer, type in Till Dawn, and then I'm going to repeat the same kind of process where I'm going to add it down to a row count, increase it, and then you're going to see the size here. It's going to fit perfectly within these 4 rows. And then once again, extend it to the grid lines. So now you can see how I've done this. So let me get rid of these layers and add the originals back in. And in terms of composition, what I wanted to do was have the After HoursTil Dawn as the large primary focus and then an image kind of breaking it up in the middle. So you're going to notice here, this is the image that I've opted for. In structuring this, I want to fit it within the same kind of like row design I've got going on here. So let me remove the mask. This image I just found on a Google search, and you want to use the tools on the image selector and make sure that you're filtering by size and large, so that you get these higher resolution images. So now I'm going to extend this to the grid lines just here. And then I wanted to move it around until I could kind of gauge some kind of placement. I'm going to keep it where it was just because that's where I was using. And then I'm going to go on Select and Subject. What I want here is the outline of this moon to be masked, just as you can see now. And then if I hide and reveal the image, I want it to be within these 4 rows just here. So I'm going to grab my marquee tool, hold Shift, and then drag this selection just here. Now you're going to see these legs sticking out the bottom. So I'm going to remove them, holding Option and then highlighting that area, and then I'm going to click mask on this layer. Now when it comes to actually formatting the tour dates individually, which is a lot of small text, you want to add a good amount of contrast in there between the dates and the stadiums or the locations, just so that they don't get too mixed up and they're easy to read. So let me show you here. I've got Global Stadium Tour in a different typeface, which is a bit wider and spread out and smaller. So you want the contrasting weights so that you still keep visual interest as you're going down the poster. And then below this, I've added Europe and Latin America. The typeface for these 2 is Clash Display, and that's the light variant. This is also the light variant. So now these are the dates. I've used the same Chabot typeface, which is the one I've used for the titles. I've added in the locations, the states, and then for the dates, what I've done is kind of half them size-wise. So for example, this is 30. I've brought this down to 16, so it's just slightly below. For the dates, I've used the condensed variant of the typeface, and then for the locations, I've used the extra condensed just to add in that kind of visual contrast I was mentioning. And then I've just spaced them out evenly just using the space bar. And then beneath that, I've added in just my design name, Ticketmaster and Live Nation, which is where they're available and on sale now. Just standard for a tour poster design. In order of formatting these within the grid, you can see here how I've aligned them. Made sure that these are within the margins at the bottom. So now, yeah, just use these rows and grid lines to kind of guide it, but you don't want to sit too strictly on it to stop you from doing something you want to do or making a design decision. So now with all the typographic content in, we can format the color and the image effects and then the overlaying texture. Now to fit in with the color scheme of the official poster, I wanted to create a almost like space-like color scheme. So these kind of like deep blues, slightly more on the gray end. So if I go onto this gradient overlay here that I've added on the background, you're going to see the colors that I've opted for here. Now these blend really well with the type color, which is this really subtle gray going into a blue hue. But this gradient overlay is just linear, and I'm bringing it in from the bottom right corner just as this kind of sense of light coming in from the bottom. So use those same kind of color schemes. You can see this gradient overlay here. I'm going to give you the hex code values just there. And now from this point, I want to color the image whilst matching it with the background. So I'm going to add a gradient map, which I've done here. I'm going to enable this, and you're going to see the background color is selected in with the background color just around the image. Now this is making it blend in with the background. Although it's a gradient, it's not going to be perfect. So in areas like this, but we come to fix that later on. So now I've added this contrasting color here, this complementary orange against the blue, which work really well together. And I've gone for this reddy orange hue just here, adding in a yellow and then a white towards the highlights just to give a lot of depth in the image. Now, in order to actually create more depth between the image and the text and make it a more comprehensive piece, I've added some rings and shadows around the moon. So as I add in these layers here, and I've got this top shadow just because I moved the text over it, but let me remove that. I've added these glowing rings around the moon, and this is going to create more separation between the title and the image and just add more detail for the piece. So the first one I've added is this gradient ring around the outside. So in order to create this, I've just created a new layer, and I've made this brush the same kind of size as the moon here and just painted in behind it. So with this white brush, I want to mask this now behind the moon. So in order to do this, I'm going to come onto our image layer, select subject, and I'm going to get the moon and Abel's outline masked. And now from here, I can just click mask on this layer, use Command I to invert it, and now it's going to display just behind them. From this point, I've just used the white brush, and you can add in a gradient overlay on it. So if I add in a orange hue here, I can drag this in, maybe even add a slight yellow hue, maybe slightly more into orange. And I'm going to set this style to reflected. Now this, when I remove the kind of harsh contrast, is going to reflect really well, and it's going to create this kind of directional blur. And if I increase the scale here, it's going to cover the majority of the moon. So now from this point, I've just added in a few more rings around it. So I wanted to select just the moon here. So I'm going to select the mask we've already created. I'm going to use the lasso tool to just get rid of the legs whilst trying to keep it in a circle. I'm not going to be too strict on this design just for the sake of the video, but try and make it as accurate as you can. So now with this, I want to use Command Shift I. I want this moon to be selected. So just the circle. Now from this point, I'd create a new layer, and I'm going to get a white brush again. I'm going to make the brush size a lot smaller, and I'm going to just create a brush around the outside. Now the idea is that if the light source was coming from behind the moon, you're going to have this glow around the outline. So I'm just going to briefly go around this. You could create a shape, give it an outer glow, but I prefer to just do it manually. And then around the leg area, I'm just going to remove it. So there we go. Now with this removed, we can go on to color overlay. And this is where you're going to opt for the kind of highlighted color within the image. So this kind of like creamy white. And then I'm going to go on to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. And then I want it blurred enough so it's just slightly around the outside, but not so that it's completely see-through. So probably about here is good. And then from this point, you just play around with opacities and colors and make sure that they're all adjusted. So if I get rid of these two layers, I'm going to see I've added that gradient ring, which is a lot more vibrant here. So if anything, just painting more white on this gradient layer. And then I've got the blurred ring behind that, which I've made for a bit more of yellow. The outer one is the one I've just showed you, and I've duplicated that just to make it a little bit more dense. I want to make sure that this vibrant color here, this kind of like brightest yellow, is around this kind of area because I'm going to add a lens flare to it. So I've just searched for a lens flare PNG image. So if I remove this mask, this is what it looks like as a base. You normally want to set lens flares to linear dodge. And then what I've done is taken the image mask layer, got my black brush, and I've just painted around the edges here just to blend it in better with the rest of the design. Now, these are always really easy to blend. Like if I just brush around the outside, it's almost completely borderless now. And then I've just copied the same gradient map I've used for the image, pasted that onto this lens flare here. And now we've got this nice matching color lens flare along the bottom of the moon as if the light source is behind it. So now from this point, because the moon is over the text, what I wanted to do is bring that layer beneath. And I'm also going to combine this step with the texturing element. I'm going to hide my main titles folder just here. Now the reason is because I've added a displacement effect to this, which is going to create these distressed outlines you can see. Now I've done this using my film dust texture, using my action pack, which I'm soon working on to release to you guys so that you guys can start using all of these shortcuts you see in my videos. So in order to do this, I've taken my main titles folder, I've come over to dust displace, and I've pressed play on this, and now it's going to create a duplicate, and it's going to move it back into place and give me this displacement effect. So now as you can see, this is a lot less subtle because I increased the value, but you get the premise of how I've done this. So now reveal my main title folder, and then I've got this smoke shadow layer just here, which is a dark brush which I've gone over the outlines of the image with. Now this is to just blend this better in with the background and create some separation. Within that rings and shadows folder you saw earlier with this top shadow, you can now see the purpose of this. What I've done is added a new layer, selected the background color, taken a big soft brush and just dragged this over the top. I wanted this slightly showing behind the text, which is why I've not got rid of all of it. For example, like this, it takes a lot of detail away from the image. So around halfway up is where I've gone, and I wanted a little bit of the moon coming up behind it. You can just see just here. So now it's just a bit of blending and making sure that everything's kind of in place for when you add the effect. So this smoke shadow layer, I've just done the same thing. Got a new layer, taken the background color, and I've just painted around the edges to try and create a little bit more blending between the background and the image. Make this really small when it comes to the outlines. Paint over that, and it's going to make it a lot more of a softer blend. So I've taken that as a step, gone around the outlines just there, and now the composition is looking really good and ready for effects. I just need one more layer, which is this smoke just there. So if I take this layer mask off, I just found another PNG smoke image, and I'm going to drag this over this shadow layer just here. So I wanted this smoke just overlaid over the image rather than the whole canvas. So I've kind of dragged it to the same area, and I'm going to drag this underneath the original smoke shadow layer that I added, and you're going to see how it kind of blends it in a lot better. Now as a final little color touch, I wanted to add something to this smoke because this kind of default gray doesn't look too good. It doesn't add anything to the composition or color or image here. So I've added this gradient map layer over my smoke layer, and I'm going to use Command Option G to create a clipping mask just to apply it to the smoke. Now it's just added this kind of beigey tint over the image to give it that warm look to match the colors of this orange here. That's our layers completely done now. So this is where it comes into the overall overlaying effect. So to create this, the first step is to combine all your visible layers. So I'm going to use Command, Option, Shift, and E. And now this is going to be our base layer. So I'm going to name this Filter and convert this into a smart object. Now I'm going to come up to Filter and Filter Gallery here. Now this is going to have the effect already on. I need to make sure that my colors, my foreground and background are reset. So press D before you open the Filter Gallery. Otherwise you're going to see what happened just there. Now the effects I've used are already displayed, and you can see the effect it creates immediately. So the first one that we're going to add is grain. Now on grain's going to create these horizontal scan lines, which I've shown in previous videos. So if you set your grain type to horizontal and play around with your intensity and contrast, it's going to create that scan line effect going across every asset within the design. This combined with notepaper is going to add this depth between the text and the background. You can see the text kind of has its own debossed outline now. You can see it gives a little bit more depth. And then when you combine this with torn edges, it's going to strip all of that color back into black and white. Now, when these are all combined, you've got this really cool effect. It's clear texture, clear distressing, and you can play around with these settings here with the smoothness and contrast. You're going to see how much it will change just from changing one setting. So really do play around with this. And these are the kind of balancing levels that I've gone for. So I'm going to hit OK here. Now, the issue we're going to face here is that this is now just black and white. We've lost all color that we had from the original layers. Now, it's very simple to fix this because the only color I really want showing through is the orange on this moon. So I'm going to come into our channel and I'm going to command click on our RGB, which is going to highlight everything except black. And now from this point, we can come back onto our filter layer and hit mask here. So now this has removed all of the black, but we want to invert that so that we have all of the black and everything else removed. So use Command I, and now you're going to see we've maintained our original color. It's gone slightly darker into black, but that's what I wanted initially. And we've kept the color of the moon peeking through. So now from this point, I've just added in a few adjustment layers to kind of match it back to the original without the filter. So you can see this is more blue, but with the filter, it goes more into black. So the first thing I've done is add a hue saturation layer to just really increase the vibrancy of this image just here. So coming onto this, I've just increased the saturation a lot up to 55. And now this is going to be the previous one. And then I've also added a color balance just to give it more of a blue tint to return it back to the original state. So on this color balance here, I've just come into the yellow and blue, pump this up a little bit. You can even pump the sign up a little bit to match that typographic color. And then because we've got all of our blacks isolated, if we add a color overlay, it's going to act as our background color. So if I go into solid color here, just on the adjustments, and I'm going to select a blue slightly similar to our initial design. So I'm going to say around here is good. So really gray, dark blue. If I then add a clipping mask to this onto our filter layer, you're going to see how the black has now changed into this darker blue color. Now this is a little bit too light, so we're going to bump that down a little bit. There we go. So now if I hide and reveal, it's going to take that black out, but it's also going to remove a little bit of contrast. So that's when you need more adjustment layers to bring it back. So on this color balance, I'm actually going to remove our cyan just because we've changed the background color now. And on this blue, I'm only going to bump it up about to 10 rather than 15. On our color fill shadows layer as well, I'm just going to rename this just so that it's clear that this is our shadows. You can also put this onto the lighten layer mode, and this is also going to keep the background color changed, but add a little bit of clarity and contrast to the image. So with this done, now we can just add our texture overlays, which are going to consist of copy scans and noise. So the first one is a black market copy scan layer. Now if I put this back to our original settings, this is the file, and I've selected this one because this kind of mimics the smoke effect. You know, we've got this harsh black into a grey. So on this one, this is what's going to lighten it up off of that deep black colour. So I've set this one to lighten, pressed 5 on my keyboard to put it to 50% opacity, and it's also going to work really well with that gradient we set in the bottom corner. So now I've duplicated this one, set this to overlay just to add more detail over the blacks, and you can see it's also going to increase that contrast. So hiding and revealing that brings a little bit of that tone down. And now we've got our noise overlay from my action pack, which is made using the camera raw filter. So you can use this effects panel down here, copy these grain settings on a 50% grey layer and set this to overlay. And now as I zoom in, it adds that really fine grainy detail. And then to top the color all off of this, I've just added a curves layer just to adjust our shadows and highlights. So if I reveal this now, I've just brightened it up a bit. I'm also going to bring our shadows slightly down. So now this is going to really increase that contrast between the darks and the lights. So play around with curves layer, make sure everything is balanced, and that is our final poster design. So that's every step I've used. If we compare this to the original one, you're going to see there's a bit more smoke in the image here. That's just a combination of bringing the smoke image up a bit more into the image, and then playing around with your filter settings just to make sure it's still revealed. But yeah, that is our final design, and let me know what you think of it below. Now guys, thank you so much for watching until the very end. I hope I can be useful to you and that you can learn something to add to your own design process. Now YouTube's going to recommend you another few videos either side of me just here, so go ahead and watch them and you might learn another thing or two, and I'll see you over there.